Hey there, I'm Neil. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the host of my new podcast, Pause and Rewind. I'll be chatting to changemakers, thought leaders, and role models who all share a common goal. They're striving to make the world a more inclusive place. And let's face it, we need it. Each guest has a unique story when it comes to doing their thing, and we often know who people are in the now. But how much do we really know about them? Pause and Rewind takes a moment to explore the experiences in my guest's life that led them to where and who they are now. Because everyone loves an origin story. We'll dive into tales, anecdotes, and what makes our guests tick. So, are you ready to pause and rewind? Hey there, and welcome to this episode of Pause and Rewind. I've just had a brilliant conversation with the wonderful Dr. Paul Taylor-Pitt. Paul is an organisational development consultant working in inclusion as well. He's a writer, activist, and I love the way that Paul just shows up for people. I've had the privilege of working with him over the last few months on a series of events called the Midlife Quiz, which accompanies the book that he's writing, which is focusing on the experience of middle-aged, kind of 40 and plus LGBTQ folk. He's interviewed 75 people so far. He's got more to get through, and it's really shining a light on people's stories, the stories that they own, the stories that they've been told about themselves, and Paul's a storyteller, and really brings out people's stories. And so he was a natural fit for Pause and Rewind because I was really curious to hear more about Paul's origin story. And wow, the conversation did not disappoint. It was fabulous to hear him speaking about little Paul, and yeah, the experiences of his life that have brought him to where he is now, Dr. Paul Taylor-Pitt. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. Let me know what you think, and yeah, check it out. Hey there, Paul. Welcome to Pause and Rewind.
Thanks for having me. Lovely to be here.
Thank you so much for agreeing to appear. To start with, I'm going to throw a big question at you. What does the world
Hmm.
look like for Dr. Paul Taylor-Pitt right now?
What does the world look like? So I think there are multiple worlds. I think the world that I see in front of me is on fire, and I feel quite afraid for the first time in a long time. I feel quite scared for us as a population of queer people, and I feel quite nervous about what comes next. And then on the inside, my internal world is actually a really cool place because I feel confident in myself. I feel powerful in a lot of aspects. I feel very, um, yeah, content, I guess, which is a really nice place to be. In a way, I think content, if I had thought that that was going to be a goal for my life, I would have thought that was really boring. But at this stage of my life, content is good enough. So yeah, life is quite split, I think, between the sense of joy and happiness that I have for me in my own life and the fear that I have in the bigger world. And the way that I show up in the world, I guess, is that I work as a organizational development consultant. I run my own business. I have my own consulting practice. I'm also a coach and a mentor, uh, a writer, a podcaster, like one of those kind of multi-hyphenated. Don't try and box me into just saying, oh, I'm this, because I've tried that and it just doesn't work.
It doesn't. You know, many of us queer people wear so many different hats and we get involved in so many different things. And I think part of that is the what is just the way we show up. I think we often we know that we need to show up for ourselves and for our community, and we find really creative and innovative ways to do that. And I totally hear what
Mm.
you're saying. I would say that being content is so underrated.
Mm. Yeah, I don't think it's ever something I would have aspired to.
Same.
I would have never thought, one day I'd love to be content. But there is a comfort in contentedness. And I think contentedness also becomes a platform for a lot of other stuff. I think when I reflect on my life, there have been times when I haven't felt content, and things are just harder in general. Things become more difficult to achieve. So yeah, I think content is a good baseline that then, it's like the solid ground that you need to set off a bunch of fireworks.
Absolutely. And we love the fireworks, and there's always stuff to get excited about. I am particularly excited about your book.
I'm excited about my book too. I think it's a really exciting thing. It's been a work in progress for a long time, actually. I guess all my life in some ways. But the book I'm working on is I've been describing it as self-help, but I don't know that self-help is a good way of describing it. I think it's a bit of self-coaching, it's a bit of self-reflection, it's a bit of self-exploration for queer people in midlife, such as myself. Someone said to me, you write the book you need to read. And I believe that because every time I write a bit more, I go, oh, I'm talking to myself. But what's been the most exciting thing about it is the opportunity I've had to talk to people in a similar situation and a similar stage of life. I started just initially with one post on Instagram that said, "I'm working on this book. Anyone between the ages of 40 and 60 fancy having a chat?" And I thought maybe a couple of people would come forward. And so far, I've interviewed 75 people, and I've got another 25 to go. I don't know why, but I'm determined to get to 100. And it's honestly been the biggest privilege ever to sit with people and witness them and hear their stories. Sometimes I've had to stop someone and say, Hang on, that's not your story, that's my story. How can this be the same?" And at other times, I've heard stories that are so wildly different to my own. And all of them are really welcome. So that's what's really giving me a lot of excitement at the moment is finding a place to put some of those stories that I think we'll just get lost. We will get lost in the speed of change. And so it's a fantastic opportunity for me to have some time with these amazing people, some of whom would never describe themselves as amazing. They would see themselves as incredibly ordinary, but their stories are amazing.
I love that concept of capturing people's stories against this speed of time as a baby midlife queer, and that's a term that we've both come across recently with the event series that is taking place alongside the book. As a baby midlife queer, I definitely feel that life is just passing by so quickly.
Hmm. And there is, there's lots of fake science around this, and there is some real science around it. I think there is absolutely uh, a place in the brain where our perception of time changes as we get older. So there is a small part of the brain that just starts shrinking when you get to a certain age. And so we perceive time differently. And there's also so many things that are demanding our attention and capturing our attention that for me, I feel like a month now feels like a week, and a week
Mhm.
feels like a day, and a year feels like a month. And it's quite sobering, actually. My friend Jonas, for my 50th birthday last year, bought me this incredible print. It's made up of 4,000 dots, which apparently is the number of weeks that the average person lives for. And when he ordered it, he put my date of birth in, so it came pre-filled, and more than half the dots are already filled in. And and I look at it, and what I think is really interesting is I've refused to fill in any more dots since he gave it to me, so I'm kind of stuck at 50 forever. But there is something about looking at the fact that there are fewer dots ahead of me than behind. And it's making me be very deliberate about how I choose to spend my time, who I choose to spend it with, what I want to do with my life. Because all of those dots that have got me here, they're done. I'll never get those back. I'll never change them. I'm very forward looking. I'm actually not particularly reflective. And so I'm very deliberate about, okay, what do I do with that next dot? How do I make it count?
That's yeah. Wow. I mean, that's so challenging as a thought process. And I know that, whether we've spoken before, I've mentioned about my realizations around mortality, but also legacy as well. And I
Mm,
really like that really resonates with me about what you do with the rest of those dots and brings into account all types of things that we talk about within within DEI and lived experiences is purpose and intent and legacy. So yeah,
Mm.
oh gosh, it's a lot to get your head around, right? The fact that yeah, I
It
feel
is.
that.
And thankfully, like I really, now and again, I feel like I operate in a lot of this and that situations. I try not to ever be either or. I try to be a bit more expansive. I think legacy for me I have a really odd relationship with legacy. You know, I'm an only child, I'm a queer person, I don't have any children. And often I think about the generations of, you know, cold Scottish people hiding in caves from saber-toothed tigers, just so they could all pass on their genes down the line. And then it's come to me, and the family tree stops here.
Mm.
And I grew up with a lot of guilt around that, that all of those people went through all of their lives, and now it's stopping with me. But where I am now is I go, oh, that's great. You know, you're welcome. Thank you. You have peaked, family tree. Um, which, you know, I don't necessarily completely mean, but there is something for me about this pool of legacy, which is wanting to do something with my life, wanting to make sure that all of those cold winter nights spent in caves were not wasted. And I also think, yeah, it's just about living my life. I don't have to leave a legacy. I don't have to do anything. There is no pressure on me to achieve anything other than what I want to. And I go between those two. And at the moment, I'm very much in the you must leave a legacy. And I hope at some point I can make peace with myself and feel like, yeah, I don't have to do anything else. I don't have to do more.
I am on that struggle bus right now. You know, I fear you. Let's talk about aging within the queer community because it is, you know, it's a lot of the premise of the book is around kind of the need for intergenerational stories. Um, and I just feel that as a community, you know, as a midlifer in the community, I feel that I've experienced ageism quite early, at
Mm,
41, which can be quite tough.
mm,
And you know that's me as a white cis gay man. So never mind the experience of women who generally kind of are at the butt of
mm,
ageism quite a lot of the time, particularly when it comes to menopause and such. But we see a lot of ageism in the community, but we also see a lot of reverse ageism in the community as well. You know, we see people brushing Gen Z off, you know, as
mm.
either being woke or not having enough experience. What's your take on the issue of ageism within the LGBTQ community?
I think any kind of ism for me always demands a bit of curiosity. I could I could easily and have easily jumped into being really judgmental about it. And I like to think that with age comes more opportunities, more possibilities to turn that judgment into curiosity. So growing up, I remember hearing lots of stories about AIDS in the 80s and 90s. And and for me, that just planted the seed that I'd just be dead by the time I was 30. So I thought life would end at 30. So that was my expectation. Maybe that was me channeling my prehistoric ancestors, because for them, life probably did end at 30. And life ended at 30 for a lot of queer people in my generation. So I feel very lucky to still be here. I feel very fortunate that I can do something with the time that I've got. And what I think sometimes happens for any kind of ism is that it comes from a particular place. There's roots in heteronormativity, and we often internalize that and then turn it into something like homonegativity. So I think the concept of ageism is a very heteronormative concept. I think even the concept of middle age is a very straight concept, and it comes from women's usefulness. You know,
Mm.
there's this idea of being over the hill, and you know, particularly for women, the expectation that they're only useful if they're able to have children. And that when you go beyond that, then you just go on this downward slump. So I think the concept of midlife is actually quite heteronormative. Part of me, through the process of writing this book, is thinking we need to recreate it, to reinvent the concept of midlife. Because I think how it translates is that as queer people are already on the margins, we then tell ourselves stories that we have some kind of responsibility for. So I hear a lot of people and I see a lot of people on social media saying, "Oh, I'm turning 30, it's gay death. That's it. I'm no longer a twink, and oh, I'm so old." And I probably said that. So I have no judgment about this. I also think that we can be quite cruel to ourselves and each other because we're so used to it from the straight society that we kind of turn it into banter and shade and all of these things that we say, oh, this is what makes us. I think it's a coping mechanism. I think it's a defense. I think often it's a way of us building up some scar tissue around these things so that we can laugh at it. But ultimately, it doesn't really serve us. And I think those stories that we tell each other about each other that don't serve us, for me, just have to go. We just have to challenge them. I would love to see 70 as being queer midlife. I would love to think that we can get to a place in our lives where we can feel like we're just a baby midlifer when we're 95. That, we can reinvent these concepts. I don't think any kind of ism, whether it's ageism, racism, sexism, anything, it serves no one. So I'm always curious about holding it up and looking at it and going, where are the roots of this? And if it's not something that we invented, we don't have to hold on to it.
I love that because we're all human. We all deserve a place in the world, and we're all learning new things all the time. We all go through kind of different phases of our lives and different stories and different versions of ourself that are the baby version of that self.
Mm,
Yeah, I love that reframing. Well, I mean, this topic is huge. You've got a book on it. It's something that people are talking more and more about, and it's so exciting to see it. And particularly when it comes to, this concept of midlife and decline. And
mm,
we're seeing there's a lot of talk around menopause and women going into decline, but actually it's quite the opposite, for
mm.
many, many people. They're finding new leases of life and finding ways in which maybe their organizations and their what was life no longer
Mm.
serves them. And so there's this reinvention.
Yeah. And, my favorite philosopher in the world, Madonna, often talks, my North Star, she often talks about this concept of reinventing herself. And recently she said, I keep reinventing myself so I can keep being myself.
Oh, love
And
that.
yeah, for me, when I heard that, I thought, yeah, we never just have to be one thing. Nobody has. And yet, the world, society, they, whoever they are, kind of want us to put ourselves into a box, to describe ourselves as one thing, to give ourselves a career label that gives us some kind of value, to um, to believe that we are this and that's all that's possible, because that helps to keep us small. Whereas if you see that the possibility of life means that we can unfold and change and reinvent ourselves as many times as we like, that's power. There's energy in that potential for change. And so I hear politicians, I see media, I hear even within our community people limiting themselves, and really, that just gives us smallness. That's the only possibility when we limit ourselves is smallness. And I'm done with smallness.
Yes. Size queen.
Exactly. Make it bigger, make it girthier. I think I say I think, grew up in a time when just so much of the discourse about us, about me, was so negative. And then it started to shift and it changed. And I naively believed that change was just this linear process, that everything just got better with time. And so I became quite lazy. I think in my 30s, when, legislation was changing and the conversation about queer people was changing and, different rights were given to us finally, I think I became quite safe, quite boring, quite ordinary. And thankfully, something shifted, and I went, oh no, that's not me. That's not my story. I don't want to be that person. And so, actually, for me coming into my 50s, I feel much more energized and much more dynamic and much more empowered because I can see that there's now something to fight for again. And there always was. I have huge privilege from being cisgender white man, and it's easy to become quite complacent and lazy. And I'm glad and feel very fortunate that I'm in a place now where I go, no, it's not okay until it's okay for everyone everywhere. And sadly, I don't think that will ever happen in my lifetime, but I'd love to think that I won't ever stop trying in a way that maybe I just took my foot off the pedal a little bit.
But it's back on there now, full throttle.
Yeah. A bit like the wacky races. I don't know whether I'm Dick Dastardly or Penelope Pitstop. It's like one of the two.
Both,
That's
both.
such a middle-aged reference. People who are Gen Z will listen to that and go, "Who the fuck is Penelope Pitstop?"
Google it because it was bloody amazing. Paul, thank you so much for being here. Are you ready to pause and rewind?
Always.
Let's do this. Take me back. Tell me all about little Paul.
So, Paul, I don't feel like I've grown very much. It's an interesting thing when I meet people in real life. If I've been talking to them online, they often go, "Oh, you're not as tall as I expected." And sometimes I ask them, like, what did they think? And they go, "Oh, I thought you'd be like 6 foot, but I'm really like 5'5". And so I don't think I've changed that much in a lot of ways. There's a photo of me as a young kid, maybe like 5 or 6, which I absolutely love. I'm wearing these purple flares and this amazing top, and I'm kind of like bending forward, looking through my legs, and I've got quite long blonde hair, and it's just like dropping down onto the grass. And it's a photo that just for me captures such joy. And the thing that I love about it even more is that just next to me is a football, and that football never got touched. Like I just totally ignored it and was like, no, I'm just going to do this amazing move in my purple flares. And so I think that really captures the spirit of who I was when I was a kid. I was never sporty, I was never manly, I was never the kind of boy that would conform to anything that was expected of me. But I think what came with that is that I was pretty quiet as well. I was an only child, and my parents were both teenagers when they had me. And as a kid, I don't think I ever really understood that. I just saw them as, oh, they're my parents. So therefore they're a different generation and therefore they're adults. But my mum was 18 when she had me. My dad was, I think, just 20. So they were really just kids themselves raising a child. And now, with a bit of hindsight and a bit of perspective, I can see that. And I can see that at that age, they had no idea really what they were doing. So I think I ended up being quite capable. Like, I think I ended up being the adult in the room from quite a young age. And from as far as I can remember, like, it was never a moment where I questioned my sexuality. I always knew what I was. And I knew that there were stories around that meant that wasn't okay. I never believed there was anything wrong with me. I always was quite, maybe quite arrogant in a lot of ways. I just thought, oh no, the world is wrong. It's not my fault. You're wrong. But I think I ended up being this kind of little pensioner child that was quite quiet and spent a lot of time in the library, did a lot of reading. I was really comfortable with my own company. And I almost looked at my parents and was like, oh, I wish you two would grow up. So I think I always had a bit of a, old person head on me. Like when I turned 50, I thought, finally, I'm the age I've always been. So yeah, that I love that photo of me because it has a certain freedom that I don't think I always felt. I was never one of those kids that would run around like drawing attention to myself or making a fuss or, what some might describe as just having fun. Like I think I was really serious. So yeah, I think I was always really kind of well behaved, partly again because I always thought maybe I was a bit superior. I always looked at those kind of rowdy kids and was like, oh, you're so immature, when I was like 7. So there was something in me that I think grew up really quickly and was okay with that. I look back on it now and I feel a bit sorry for him. I think, oh, wouldn't it have been nice to have been just running around and doing stupid things? But that's not who I was. And to try and make me that would have been me being someone else. I think I
There's
was
so
just being genuinely myself.
there's so much pressure to be a certain way as children and as adults. Um, do you look back now, are you grateful for that sense of individuality and self that you had in kind of, showing up as the person you are now?
Yeah, I would not change a single thing about me at all, ever. And I think that that also partly comes from the fact that I knew that the world would quite happily change me.
Mm,
Society would have changed me. I've never been one of those people that's been like, oh, if you could take a pill and not be gay, would you do it? If I could take a pill to make me more gay, I would do that. And I feel very fortunate and lucky. I don't know what it is. This is part of my exploration with the process of writing, is trying to get to this core of whatever it is that gave me this almost superpower of just always knowing that I've been all right, that there's nothing wrong with me. And I've heard and spoken to so many people who believed the lies that were told about them, who then turned it in on themselves
mm.
and have really struggled with that. I maybe have struggled in different ways because I've just always kind of shaken my fist at the world and gone, but you're wrong. So I know that I would rather be that than have folded in on myself. So there's something at the core of me that just had this refusal to ever believe that I was the problem. And I think that came from, being curious and doing a lot of reading and spending a lot of time on my own and making sense of myself. I never craved company, which, I had some really close friends, but I also was really happy on my own. I think one of my saddest memories, I remember being in the back of the car, and it must have been coming up to my birthday. I don't know how old I was, maybe like 9 or something. And I remember saying that I wanted a speak and spell, which, for Gen Z, it's like a primitive iPad that basically it was like one of those that it was one of the first, like I was always really nerdy. It was one of the first things that had a voice synthesizer. So it would in a very robotic voice say, spell banana. And then you would type it in, it would go, hey, well done. And I remember saying to my parents, I want one of those because I would like a friend. And I feel a bit sorry for him because I think, yeah, there was something in there that just wanted some connection that I didn't have. But I think on some level, I just knew it's because I was just different to my friends. I was different to my family. And I wanted to have some kind of connection that would maybe just give me a bit of validation and go, yeah, you're all right. Maybe because I could spell. Maybe I was looking for it in the wrong places.
I mean, maybe, but I think, whereas I do think that I do think that is really unique and beautiful that you felt that way, that you knew you were okay when it was the world, and
Mm,
I don't think that there are lots of queer people out there that feel that way because of enforced on us. But I think
mm,
that knowing that you were different, that's not uncommon.
mm.
I think it's so you and you'll know this from talking to so many people and just living life as a queer person without the
Yeah,
language and terminology around gender and sexuality and before that's imprinted on us as queer people and thrust on us. We
yeah,
know that we're a little bit different.
yeah. And I always embraced my own difference, even when other people didn't. I remember we, I mean, again, I was never really sporty. So we had this I can't remember what they called it. I think it was like some kind of school Olympics. And of course, I was really shit. Like, I was the lazy kid that just used to get notes all the time to excuse me from doing cross-country running. So when it came to anything like that, I just immediately withdrew. But for some reason, it must have been 1990, so I must have been about 15. Um, this year at school, they said, right, we're going to do this Olympics thing, but we're also going to have cheerleaders. And I put myself forward to be a cheerleader.
Love.
And oh no, I look back and I think, how did I have the courage to do this? But it honestly didn't feel like a big thing because then I was like the head cheerleader. And not only that, I taught the rest of the girls, because they were all girls, how to Vogue because I'd been learning the dance routine from Madonna's video. And so I, I honestly wish, and I'm kind of glad it's not captured. Part of me wishes it had been captured on film because I can't imagine what people must have thought when this bunch of people came out because we were all a bit of the misfits of the school and started voguing. And I remember the girls actually drew the line because I said to them we should make ourselves cone bras. And they were like, no, we're not doing that. So there was a part of me that just had no fear, and also a part of me that was maybe just completely in denial about what was really going on.
But whatever, like what a gorgeous memory to have of yourself. Yeah, I love that. I love just the courageousness of just, of going out there and just saying, "Hey, I'm leading this squad. I'm head
Leading the
cheerleader."
squad, and I taught them choreography.
Oh,
I couldn't do
brilliant.
cross country running, but I could Vogue like fuck.
How's your voguing now?
Oh, I can still do it. I mean, you never lose this. Like riding a bike. If I ever ride a bike,
Okay,
you just learn it. One
voguing is like
day,
riding a bike, people. You heard it. You heard it here.
yeah, that muscle memory never leaves you.
I love. Paul, what's some of the other what's a perhaps a favorite anecdote that you've heard about yourself as a kid?
Oh, so that's interesting to me because I think some of the anecdotes I heard about myself were often to do with health. So I was seen as quite a sickly kid. Like I had asthma from quite well from birth, I guess. And it was quite bad when I was a kid. So I was often in and out of hospital and maybe I used to have quite a lot of time off school with it. I also remember being told about a time when I stuck a coat hanger in my eye and had to go to hospital to have it removed. I don't really understand that. I think there was also a time when my mum was carrying me across the road and got hit by a car. So I've got lots of these stories of like the times I almost died, which is odd because then I was just going, well, none of that's going to kill me. So I think I grew up with a bit of a sense of people's perception of me as being a bit fragile. And that wasn't my story. I never believed that because, again, I thought, well, this is asthma. It doesn't mean I'm a fragile
Mhm.
person. But yeah, a lot of those stories, I guess, of growing up were around illness, around, having really bad eczema and having to wear gloves at night because I was scratching myself to bits. Or I remember having uh, an injection at school, whatever that injection was that you all get when you're like 11, and I fainted. And so that was another weird story because I woke up in this like nurse's bed going, what was that all about? And then, the story that people told about me was the kid that faints at needles. So there was often this narrative about me as being, I don't know, maybe a bit of a Victorian lady when it came to my health. Like things were just going to knock me off my feet. But again, I never believed that. Like, it was true, but I never believed that that's who I was. These were just things that were happening.
Yeah. And the way you've taken that narrative and applied it to the way you work with other people, um,
Mm.
and helping people to kind of reframe their own stories and stuff. That's yeah, no, it's a strange one. But you've taken it and you've just run with it and just been like, that's not me.
Yeah, like being a bit kind of sickly, almost like being a bit poorly as a kid. I think in a way it just never resonated. It never, I never took that on board as who I was.
No.
It never identified me or defined me. But I was also, the first, and again, I think this is a really common story for a lot of queer people of my age. I was the first person in my family to ever go to university. I was the first person to ever, well, to ever get any qualifications at school. I was the first
Mm.
person to ever leave Aberdeen. Um, I'm certainly the first person to ever get a doctorate in my family. So, those things, I guess, on one hand, there was the story of me being this kind of poor, weak, sickly child, but there's also the story of me being the first to do a lot of things. And and I don't know how they're connected, whether they are connected or not, but I guess people would talk about me in the family as being, oh, he's the clever one, he's the smart one. Don't expect him to, go and play football because he's just
Yeah.
going to be sitting at home reading a book and watching MTV.
Yeah. Little black sheep kind of mentality almost.
Yeah, and also a bit of a mystery. And even now, I still don't think anyone in my family knows what I do for a living. If you spoke to any
Same.
of them and said, "What does he do?" they'd be like, "We've no idea."
Yeah.
And because they have no frame of reference for it. And
Hmm.
what comes with that is, quite a lot of support in terms of cheerleading, ironically, but sometimes it doesn't feel very solid. A lot of if I ever express any kind of nervousness or anxiety about something, I get this automatic, "Oh, you'll be fine."
Yeah.
And I go, "That's nice to hear, but it's not real."
Yeah.
And so there's something about that position that I had in the family of being the one who was always fine and being the adult in the room and being the smart one that sometimes makes it hard or well, and made it hard to ever admit that I wasn't fine. Because there
Yeah.
was a lot of stuff going on that meant I really was not fine, but I never had the vocabulary to describe that. And also no one really ever asked me because I was always seen as being the one that was just getting on with it and
Yeah.
just surviving stuff. So it was an odd tension because even now, I think if someone says, "How are you?" I just go, "Yeah, fine." Because I just don't have the words to go, "Oh, thanks for asking. Some of the stuff I'm going through is fine, some of it isn't." And now and again, I get really worried about stuff. And now and again, I doubt myself. But, there's no space for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I find that yeah, so much of what you just said resonates with my experience with my family even today, never mind going back to my
Mm,
teenage years, even
yeah.
today, being someone different, being, the work I do around kind of like, inclusion, activism, campaigning, they just don't get it. So they just don't know how to
No.
engage with me on a lot of levels. And that can be quite isolating.
Yeah. And I'm not going to talk for your family. I can certainly talk for my experience of mine. They just don't get it. And they choose just not to get it.
Uh-huh.
And they
100%.
they don't want to get it.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's through necessarily any kind of maliciousness. I think it's a willful blindness
Hmm.
and a sense of denial, maybe. There was a time when Dan and I went back to my family for Christmas. And, in a way, it's like if I described my family, uh, they could be so much worse. Like they really could be so much worse. They are good, decent, ordinary people. But it means that I feel like I have no place there. I just don't have a space. And what happens is that I think I'm expected to just fit into their model of what it is to be a member of the family. And I just don't do it. So Dan and I went back for Christmas a few years ago. And again, with the best intention, it was like, "Hey, let's get the games out. Let's all play a game, board games, and all that kind of stuff." And it was my dad and his partner and her kids and their partners. So, everyone's lovely, everyone's straight, and there's me and Dan. And Dan, they all love Dan. There's no problem with him in the family. They really celebrate and accept him. But the game they chose to play was called Mr. and Mrs. And they broke into couples. And, as a couple, you had to sit in the middle of the room back to back. And then they would ask each other questions like, "What's your wife's favorite handbag?" Or "What's your husband's favorite fishing rod?" And it was very funny and everyone was laughing. And as we were kind of taking turns, I thought, yeah, this is going to come to us. It's going to happen then. And I wanted to hold that discomfort. I wanted to not make them feel better about this because they genuinely didn't think they were doing anything wrong. And I didn't want to rescue them from when it got really uncomfortable. And Dan and I, we've been together a long time. We know each other really well. We can deal with this. So when it came to our turn, I said to him, "Do you want to be the Mr. or the Mrs.?" And then we sat and we answered these gendered questions about, "Does your wife think like this?" And it was so uncomfortable. But I thought, no, we're going to go through this. And if you feel uncomfortable by making us go through this, I hope you never forget that. And it's through no sense of being bad people, it's just through being thoughtless.
Yeah,
And so those kind of spaces with my family, I think there's still that thoughtlessness because they've never had to think about it. They've never had to be anything other than ordinary and themselves. And I just refuse to go into that mold. So yeah, there's quite a distance between my family, and part of me is sad about that, and part of me is okay that we can coexist and I can be who I am and they can be who they are. I've stopped trying to change them. I've stopped trying to educate them. It's not my job. I just need to live my life the best way that I want to.
absolutely. Absolutely. I know so many, not just myself, I know so many people who that who that really speaks to. Let's take it back a little bit. Let's talk about teenage Paul. What was life
God.
like as a teenager?
Oh God, I feel uncomfortable just thinking about it. Um, Again, in a way, like I look back at myself then and I think, oh, I was just living my best life. I remember I had quite long hair. I used to go through like a tin of hairspray a week. It was like a massive kind of 80s fringe that covered half my face and you could lift it up in one go. I used to carry, so we had a school uniform in the school I went to, and I used to carry a little body shop mirror in my top pocket so I could just take a look at myself and see how I was doing. I spent a lot of time in the girls' toilets smoking with them. Um, and I was just incredibly weird, like uncomfortable and bizarre, I think, in a lot of ways, but also with this sense of not really wanting to be seen. So, again, I think there's this it's always the both and, it's never either or. I think I was very uncomfortable with being seen, and yet there I was with my, flock of seagulls haircut, smoking in the girls' toilets and voguing. And then I go, oh, please don't look at me.
Right.
So I think I was quite it was both. I didn't necessarily feel uncomfortable with who I was, but I also knew that there were consequences to who I was that were not my fault. So teenage me, I guess, I was a huge George Michael fan, the signs were always there. And so I remember going to the hairdresser once and having a photo of George Michael and saying, make my hair like that, and she gave me a perm and it didn't go well. So, it was like I wasn't afraid to show who I was, but it didn't always go down well.
I think that's so
So,
so true of today though, right? I think we just want we just not you, but we just want to be ourselves, but unfortunately that comes at a consequence sometimes.
yeah. And again, maybe I need a bit more therapy to work this out, but I don't know how I did it. Like I really, I mean, I left Aberdeen at 17 and moved to London. And I think that was incredibly courageous. I would never have described it like that at the time. But the fact that I was just so committed to being myself, I honestly don't know how I did it. And I'm so glad that I could. And there were consequences. I was, um, I don't know, not necessarily ostracized because I had good, thank fuck for girls is all I can
Same,
say,
same.
because they were so protective of me. And, we had such a laugh at school. And I just remember laughing a lot. And then at the same time, being very self-conscious and being very, um, I don't know, just like a bit of a cliche in terms of falling in love with boys who were straight, who were unavailable, and then going home and writing in my diary about how much I loved them. And, just a fucking pathetic little mess. But there was something that I was working through, which I had to do in my own head because I couldn't do it out loud. So all my friends that were having relationships and messing up and having sex and getting it wrong and being dumped and all of that, they got to work through all that between the ages of like 10 and 16. And I didn't. So I was doing a lot of it in my head. Maybe that's why I wanted to speak and spell, so I could ask it like, how do I find love? But there's something for me about having that space to just go, right, what am I becoming? Who am I going to be? I don't think I met another gay person that I knew of until I was 16 or 17. And I don't believe there's a single straight person on the planet who can say they did not meet another straight person until they were 16 or
Mm,
17. And so the teenage me who was working my way through all that stuff was doing it despite the fact that there was no one there doing it with me.
yeah,
So, in some ways, it was a little bit lonely, and in other ways, I'm kind of glad that I wasn't living a very, outwardly gay life at the time because I think I would have just been a bit of a disaster. But yeah, I feel a little bit sorry for teenage me in some ways because I was never given the opportunities to make the same mistakes that my straight friends
yeah,
could.
yeah,
And and maybe I did that in my 20s.
yeah.
I kind of used that as the time to catapult myself into the gay world, but maybe behaving like a bit of a teenager.
I mean, it's not it's spoken about quite a lot now about how we kind of, there's often talks about going back, not going back to ageism too much, but there's often talk about how as queer people we party more and we're a bit more outrageous and stuff. But a lot of theory around that now is coming down to the fact that because we weren't able to do that when other people were doing it, and so we tend to do it more and carry it on more because we never had the opportunity to mess up, to just be ourselves, to enjoy who we are.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. And I also recognize that, and this is going to be a bizarre pivot, we're living in this capitalist society that wants to sell us a load of shit. And so there is a benefit in a capitalist society to people infantilizing themselves because we just get to buy more shit
True.
and everything gets kind of targeted at us. So I sometimes worry about that kind of arrested development phase that some queer people seem to
Mm,
get stuck in through no fault of their own, because there is something about this perpetual teenageness that is actually rewarded. We are rewarded if we can then spend our money on all of this crap that no one really needs. And if that's what gives people joy and that's what makes people happy, I think do it. Do it as much as you want to. I sometimes feel nervous that society, capitalism, all of that just sees us and goes, yeah, we got you. We've got you exactly where we
yeah.
want you. Just keep, there's a sign that I often see in a card shop when I walk past them and it says, don't grow up, it's a trap. And I
Okay.
think, no, the trap is that you want us to stay like children
Yeah.
all our lives. And, and I also recognize that little me maybe never had the opportunity to feel like a child. And so I resent that feeling of uh, being a bit old before my time. But at the same time, I don't know, I think there's an opportunity now for us to be whatever we want to be. So if we do want to feel like we're grown up, that's okay. If we do want to feel like we can party a bit longer, that's okay. I think as long as it's deliberate, as long as we're making a choice, and as long as it's not something that we feel we have to do.
Yeah. I often speak about the fact, choice is the optimum word there, right? Is it's
Mm,
it's it's knowing that we don't have to be dictated by
mm,
stereotypes and what we're pigeonholed into. I often say, I wish someone had told me that there was another way. And
mm,
I discovered so much about myself when I got sober 5 years ago. But I lived up to this reputation that I had
mm.
created and other people had put on me as the
Yeah.
party boy. But I wish someone had said, you don't have to be like that. Have you thought about X, Y, Z? You know,
Would you
um,
have listened to them?
no, I might have told them to piss off, but at least it would have, but at least it would have been someone trying, whereas I was just left to
Right.
my own devices because actually, again, coming down to family, no one knew how to manage me or
Yeah.
to direct me in the best way. So yeah, I might have told them to fuck off, but I might have actually taken a little bit on board if someone had taken the time. So I definitely feel that with a lot of queer people right now. What
Yeah.
did London look like, Paul? Like, well, coming from Aberdeen to London. what happened next? What did you want to be? Because obviously, kind of like, inclusion and organizational consultant probably wasn't much of a big thing then. So what did the world look like?
London, so I arrived in London in 1991, so it was a very different place.
Mm,
And King's Cross was a place that you would never go close to because it was just so dangerous. And I look at King's Cross now and I go, oh, look, there's a shop where it costs £7 to buy a donut.
it's crazy, isn't
So
it? It's
it's
crazy.
just wild. And so Soho was very different. I
Yep.
remember actually Soho didn't really have that many gay places back then. A lot of the places were around like Earl's Court. And so my first experience of those kind of queer spaces were in bars that had blacked out windows where you almost had to knock on the door to be let in. Everything was very hidden and it was seen as being a little bit risky, both in terms of, I remember the first time, I mean, I went to Heaven for my 18th birthday party. And I remember the nervousness standing in the queue to be let in because there was this rumor going around that you had to prove you were gay. And so people were going, oh my God, what happens? Do they make us like snog each other? And but there was a sense of excitement that this was a little bit unknown and a little bit
Mhm.
dangerous and a little bit different. So I think London was a really good place for me to find who I was and be who I was. I don't necessarily think I was always the best version of myself, but I was using it as a place where I could go to those different spaces. And then it was kind of all done under the cloud of AIDS. And so I remember the first time, maybe in 1992, the first time I met someone who had just been diagnosed as HIV positive. And I remember him just going, I don't know what this means. I think I'm going to die soon. So even as I was becoming an adult, I was in this time where it wasn't just okay to be completely frivolous and have no consequence and no, I guess, no freedom. So London felt both a very exciting place and quite a scary place at the same time. It was a place where I felt like I could absolutely experiment with who I wanted to be, but it was still hard. It was still, I remember still uh, particularly my university, which was a very male-dominated engineering public school. There were lots of people who just looked at me and went, "We don't know what you are," and they were quite
Mm,
happy to tell me that, we don't know what you are and we don't like what you are. And so even being at university was quite a scary place sometimes. People did not want me to be there. But my response to that was just to go, well, I'll be here even more. So I became at the time, it was the president of the Lesbian and Gay Society. That's how long ago that was. And I was determined to be really visible and to amplify the voices of the queer community, I guess we would call it now. So, yeah, London for me was a place where I was a bit of an activist. The age of consent was 21. And, I kind of joke about how I was living a criminal life. Actually, no one wanted to go near me at that stage. So I was quite safe. But, arriving in London at 17 and knowing it would be illegal if I had sex with another man felt very odd. And again, I never believed that I ever needed to be protected, but I know that's the story people were telling about me. As a young gay man, you need to be protected from these predators. And I think it's really interesting how that's still seen as the truth.
mm.
So London was a place where I kind of broke some rules and also followed some rules. And I think I went a bit off the rails round about like the third year of my degree because I just didn't know what was going on anymore. Didn't know who I
What were you
was.
studying?
Psychology, how ironic. You study things you need to learn. But yeah, I was in a place where I was just making sense of who I was and giving myself the chance to make some mistakes, giving myself the chance to try stuff out and see who I wanted to be, but kind of still under this, I don't know, this societal umbrella of there's something wrong with you. So even then, it still didn't feel quite right. I remember, the first time I went and bought any kind of gay porn, it was from HMV. And again, Gen Z, Google what HMV was. And it was like the most tame, it was a video, VCR, and it was these two guys like in a boxing match. And but then they took their clothes off, but they weren't allowed to be aroused. They weren't allowed to have sex with each other. So even that kind of access to something that felt really exciting, I was like, oh, this is really boring. So it was an odd time. I was
Mm.
really trying to explore who I was, but the world was not in a place to say, yeah, this is fine.
When do you think that you kind of like was just completely lost that kind of balancing act between wanting to be this person and then restrictions? When do you think you kind of like said to those restrictions, no, you're not serving me anymore?
I don't know how many of them I ever believed did serve me, but in terms of safety, I think I had to conform to some of them.
Mm.
I think it's been an evolving process. I don't think there was ever a moment where one thing shifted. I think, society shifted and culture shifted and the narrative shifted, but it was all very gradual. So I think I've tried to maybe stay a step ahead of where I think the norm is, because I don't think you can make a change when you're in that space. I think you have to try to be on the edge of it. So I don't think there's ever been a particular moment when I made a deliberate shift. I think I've just always been determined not to just fall into ordinariness. And I hate doing a massive name drop, but obviously not enough to stop me from doing it.
Do it.
But a few years ago, when I met Armistead Maupin, who's one of my heroes, and wrote Tales of the City, which was one of the first books that I read when I came to London and discovered the joy of this kind of queer life. I got to meet him, and I remember asking him, how did he manage to keep his momentum up, to never stop wanting to change things? And then he did a massive name drop, and he said, well, my friend Christopher Isherwood said that the more we try to conform, the more it becomes annihilation by blandness. And that really stuck with me, that the more we try to be just like everyone else, the more bland we become, and we just become invisible. So I took that really stuck with me, and I really try and lean into that, and to never live a bland life. I never want to be annihilated by blandness.
I
And
love
I want
that.
to get to a place where I go, yeah, despite stuff and sometimes because of stuff that got in my way, I was still able to live that life that I wanted.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Let's stay on that theme. Talk to me about someone who has perhaps shaped you the most along the way.
So I'm going to mention one of my first ever managers, Rita Cheetle. Rita passed away a few years ago, which was incredibly sad. And Rita made such a massive impact on me. She was a physiotherapist by background, and she became the head of learning and development for a local authority. And that, for me, was my first kind of proper job. And Rita used to tell a story about how when she was a kid, she used to work for Marks and Spencer, and she said they taught us how to be kind to people. And she really embodied that all the way through the years that I worked with her. And it wasn't until I left and we were having a conversation about it that she said that she had to fight quite hard for them to say yes to employing me, because at the time I had an eyebrow piercing. Now, this was 1998. So, piercings now are like, if you don't have one, you can't get a job. But I remember thinking, wow, you did that for me. And I never knew that. I never knew that people that were on the interview panel didn't want me to work there because I had an eyebrow piercing. And what I believe that was code for was they didn't want me to work there because I was gay. And so I think having someone like Rita in a position of power who was an advocate for me and then taught me the value of kindness, I'll never forget that. And, I'm so sad that she's not here anymore, but her legacy stuck with me. And I often wonder what would the world be like if more people were more like Rita and stood up for us when we were not in the room? Because we can do the work for ourselves and, no one is coming to save us. I think it's absolutely okay that we have to change our own futures. But now and again, you just need someone to stand up for you when you're not there. And that's what she did. So she had a massive impact on my life. She was the first person, I think, who kind of helped me work out who I could be when I was in that job. I also have a previous, God, it's really interesting. These are all like professional people. When I was in the final year of my degree, I worked in a place called Patrick House, which was a residential care home for people with what at the time was called AIDS-related dementia, also called HIV-related brain impairment. And, that was just the biggest privilege to work with people to care for them when they were at their most vulnerable at the end of their lives. And my manager, Andrew Langford, was just amazing. And again, I feel so lucky to have met someone who just was able to see my edges and maybe just try to not necessarily change them, but just give me this gentle introduction into the world of adulthood. And Andrew and Rita were both straight, and they were both people who saw something in me that meant they didn't want to just let me go down the path of being abandoned somewhere. So I always feel very fortunate that I had people who were in positions of authority and responsibility who looked out for me. So yeah, people like Andrew, people like Rita, they made a huge difference.
They sound so wonderful. So love that. Thank you for sharing. We've got two questions left for this segment. So, does happiness and success look and feel how you thought it would?
I don't think I knew what it looked like. So everything is a surprise, everything is a gift. I don't know that I would ever have been able to imagine what happiness and success looked like if you had asked me when I was 13. I would have just thought, I don't know, just being alive, maybe not being beaten up. I don't know. There was just so everything is a gift. Everything feels like almost surreal sometimes that this amount of happiness, this amount of success is available. And, so much of it is because of the generosity of others, and so much of it is that I've worked massively hard, and some of it is probably luck. But I don't think I could have imagined it. So everything feels like it's a bonus.
Thank you. Final question for this segment. What are you most proud of to date?
Don't think it's necessarily an achievement. I feel proud that my life has given me access to empathy, that my ability through experience to see where the world has not been designed for me has given me an opportunity to want to open doors for myself and other people. On the downside, I think it sometimes makes me quite intolerant of any kind of ism, any kind of unfairness. I think I can be massively intolerant of that, sometimes in not a very helpful way. But I feel proud that I like to believe I have compassion and kindness and empathy. And I think maybe that comes from the fact that other people had that for me, even when I was not at my best. So I feel proud of that. I feel proud that I've been able to somehow discover that and hopefully use it. And I feel proud of the opportunity to have some kind of space, whether it's a small platform or writing a book or being able to, live running my own business. I love the opportunity of then using my voice in a positive way. So I feel proud of having both been given access to and creating some of those opportunities.
And the way you show up for people really, really speaks to that. The House of Happiness is London's ultimate sober clubbing extravaganza. We're led and delivered but created for all, whether teetotal, sober curious, or just taking a booze snooze. We love a day rave, and on a Saturday afternoon you can expect banging house tunes, DJs on decks, dancers on podiums, and a fully stocked alcohol-free bar. Flamboyant, bold, with a glitter station to boot. We're all about safe, inclusive fun, and we even have a pre-meet so that you can make new sober buddies before you hit the dance floor. Grab your tickets from Instagram now at House of Happiness Official, and we'll see you on the dance floor. Are you ready for some quickfire questions?
If you don't stay ready, you don't get ready. I don't know. What's that? That's such a shit kind of quote, isn't it?
Oh,
What's the thing the kids say?
I'm feeling it, feeling it. What album,
I
book?
don't get ready, I stay ready. No idea. See, I'm 50. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Well, we're about to go into sayings, but before that, what album, book, or movie has had a lasting impact on you?
Oh, so many. First one that comes to mind, I guess, is The Color Purple. I think probably one of the books that I've read the most many times. Yeah, Color Purple. I am, I'm not a religious person. I was never raised religious, but I love the spirituality in The Color Purple, and I love, in particular, the quote uh, where, which I might get wrong, which is about God gets really upset if you walk past the color purple and don't appreciate it.
Okay.
And that stands out for me in a way that I think, yeah, now and again, you just have to notice the stuff that's just here to make us feel joyful, and we should appreciate that.
Thank you. What's a saying you live by and one that you'd put in the bin?
I guess one of the things I live by is something that my mum always used to say to me. She used to always say, go for it. Just go for it. And I hear that. I hear her voice in my head a lot, just saying, go for it. And I think that has been a real driver, a real encouragement to me just to go for it. The one I put in the bin, it is what it is.
It's mine as well, and
Oh, is it?
it's come up multiple times on this, and yeah,
Really?
burn it
Burn it, because all it does is it reinforces people being stuck.
and complacent.
Yes. And like, oh, well, we're okay. And I just think, no, fuck that. Bin it is what it is. Burn it to the ground.
It's the third time it's come up, and it's mine, so it's definitely one for the trash. What's been the best adventure of your life so far?
Being in a 24-year relationship,
Oh,
that's been, I mean, I'm actually not a fan of like roller coasters and stuff. I would never go to Alton Towers for fun. But I imagine that being in a 24-year relationship is a bit like spending your whole life in an adventure park. I just find it the most exciting, thrilling, terrifying, wild ride. Like just having the opportunity to be spending my life with my best friend and the man that I'm most in love with in the world is just the best adventure.
that's beautiful. That's so beautiful. Thank you. And what's three words would you use to describe you and your origin story?
Ordinary, remarkable, ridiculous.
Ordinary, remarkable, ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
They're the
love
ones that
that.
come to mind. I don't know why, but in some ways, my origin story is so ordinary. There's something so just generic about it. And yet something remarkable happened in my life that gave me this sense of freedom and this sense of confidence and this sense of power that I've tapped into. And that also makes it feel a bit ridiculous. I go, how
Yeah,
did this happen? How did this happen? And it makes me smile a lot. It makes me laugh a lot to go, how am I doing this? So yeah, I think those three seem to fit.
amazing. Let's fast forward a little bit. What exciting things do you have coming up?
So obviously my book is very exciting, and the midlife queers sessions that we're working on together are a constant source of excitement.
You really are.
I love holding these spaces for people to tell their stories. I so look forward to them because I never know what's going to happen. Beyond that, I don't know. And so maybe I'll quote another philosopher, Bjork, uh, when she says, I don't know my future after this weekend, and I don't want to. Because you can never predict anything. We live in this chaotic world that is so changeable. I just hope that I remain curious. I hope that I remain in awe of what goes on in the world, and I hope that I can continue to have a voice in it. So yeah, I'm not sure what might happen from here on. That's part of the adventure, is just being open to the possibilities and to resist believing that midlife is the beginning of a decline. Because for me, it's a launch pad, it's a diving board, it's a
Yes.
rocket ship.
Yes, it's just the beginning. It's just the beginning.
Mm.
I love our shared love of quoting philosopher pop stars, by the way. I don't know if you noticed my Natasha Bedingfield one that I sneaked in on Monday evening. But yeah, I'm here for it.
I added Natasha Bedingfield's Unwritten to the Midlife Queers playlist.
Yes.
And I
Thank
was
you.
listening to it yesterday and I thought, oh, Natasha, you're so wise.
Absolutely. We're here for a bit of naughties. What brings you joy?
Oh, that's a horrible question because I still give myself a hard time that I don't think I'm a fun person.
You don't have to be
Like I'm
fun.
not, I know, but the concept of joy for me, I picture people bouncing on a trampoline and giggling, and that's never going to be me. What brings me joy is reading a book. It's having a really nice coffee.
Yeah.
It's now and again, maybe on a bank holiday, going clubbing, but I can't do it too often because I'm too tired. It's seeing a representation of queerness on screen that touches me in some way. It's people like Damien Barr, who's another person I really admire, writing about his life, putting it on stage, and just being so visible. Those kind of things bring me joy. I wish I could sometimes be more frivolous and say, oh, candy floss, but I'm just not that kind of person. Joy for me has to have some kind of depth to it.
That's fair. It's your version of joy. It's your story, Paul. It's all valid. It's all valid. I mean, mine is going for a sunny run by myself.
Oh, nice.
It's the quieter moments in life actually that bring me more joy now.
Hmm. I mean, this is going to sound like a humble brag, which maybe it is, but I did 7 marathons a few years ago, and it destroyed any love I had for running. So the fact that you
Yeah.
can find joy in it gives me joy because I just ruined it for myself.
Well, I love the humble brag. So yeah. What practical takeaways do you have for anyone listening who wants to carve out a career in inclusion or simply do something to create an inclusive space?
Be deliberate, um, have a knowledge base. I
Mm,
think so much of our work is powerful because it's based on evidence and it's based on research and it's based on the opportunity that we have to show what difference it makes. I would also say find yourself a mentor. I think these roles are not easy, and the space that we're in is going to become increasingly more toxic because of our vile government. So I think finding someone who can act as a mentor, finding someone who can be an advocate for you and give you space to reflect and think and critique yourself, I think is incredibly important. So yeah, be evidence-based, have a sense of the outcome that you want to see, and find someone who can help you get there. You don't have to do this on your own.
no, no, and it shouldn't be easy, but also doing it on your own, it just completely neglects the importance of collaboration and co-production, which is essential for this work. Paul, my final question to you is, do you have any words of wisdom, advice, or encouragement for anyone out there to help them get to wherever they're going?
I'm going to go back to my mum's words. Go for it. Just go for it. I think the worst thing for me would be to never try. I think it's utterly fine to try and make so many mistakes and learn from them and grow and evolve. But if you don't try, we just get nowhere. So yeah, I would be grateful for my mum's words. Go for it.
Go for it. Paul, thank you so, so much for spending this time with me. I've absolutely
Thank
loved
you.
hearing all about little Paul. Yeah, ordinary, remarkable, ridiculous. I love those words for your origin story. But just, yeah, I love the work you do, the way you show up for people, and it's just been amazing to hear how little Paul and the wonderful little version of you that you are is still so prevalent today in how you show up. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm not very reflective. I'm not someone who dwells on the past. I'm much more interested in the future. So it's been really useful, powerful, important, and really special to have this time to reflect on some of those things because it's also raised questions for me. I'm now thinking, how did that happen? So, yeah, thank you for giving me the chance to reflect on those things.
Thanks so much for
Thank you
being here.
for all the stuff you do.
Oh, thank you. Maybe we'll have a part two.
When I'm 100.
Bring it on. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Nia.
I hope that you enjoyed my conversation with Paul as much as I did. It was fantastic to talk about little Paul and this serious little kid who went through life and went, as Paul said, as he turned 50, felt like he'd turned the age that he had always been. But through that, finding moments of fun and joy in his way. And I think that's what really stands out to me about listening to Paul's story is I love this refreshing experience that he shared about he was always okay with who he was, as a kid, as a queer kid, as a kid that knew that they were different. And the world might not have been okay with it, but he was okay with it. And that sense of self, that sense of confidence in who he was and how that's carried through. And I've got this image of Paul raising his fist at the world, saying, "No, I am who I am." And about a bit of Gloria Gaynor, we love a pop reference with Paul, and just knowing that it was the world's problem, and it really is. Everyone should be okay with who they are as they grow up and not made to feel different or othered or that they should be anything but who they are. So yeah, and I really see that in Paul and his story through, growing up as a queer kid in Aberdeen through to moving to London and finding himself and the work that he does now. So, Paul, thank you so much for being a guest on Pause and Rewind. I absolutely love working alongside you. This event series has been amazing, and yeah, just roll on more times, roll on more conversations. Stay tuned for more episodes of Pause and Rewind with brilliant conversations. Like and subscribe, share, and yeah, see you soon. Cheers.